steps, but this is certainly one. Both sides know it's going to have a devastating impact. So they need to work together, figure it out, and move our country forward.
Thank you. I have another question for you. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act, also known as No Child Left Behind, is to be reauthorized in this upcoming Congress. What would you propose to do in regards to standardized testing?
Well, I want to see what the results are. That was my question. Show me it's been a good investment of taxpayer dollars. Show me what the costs were and what were the benefits. If it has tremendous benefits, I think we reauthorize it, we move forward. If it doesn't, then I think we need to come up with a different plan.
All right, Mr. Lowenthal?
Well, I think that we spend too much time. I think testing provides us with a snapshot or a glimpse of where students are at a particular moment. I believe we spend an inordinate amount of time teaching to the tests and not having students learn the real skills that are going to be required for them to be successful later on. I am real excited that even with the reauthorization, that all the states coming together, which they are, to move forward, as I mentioned before, with a Common Core standard and Common Core curriculum, that we are about, and a new assessment where we don't have tests once a year, but that we use tests to help students. Right now, test results never get back to the student. The reason why we have an assessment is to help a student grow and learn. We don't do that. Test results come back 3 months later after the student has left that class and has moved on to the next grade or unfortunately can't move on. What we need to do is to have online, ongoing assessment where teachers and students work together to understand how they're learning, and what the impediments are. Right now, the system that we have is very, very poorly designed and really allows us to have large-scale overall records of how schools are doing. It doesn't help the students, and students are spending an inordinate amount of time. There's no incentive for any student to do well on those. It has nothing to do with their education. It doesn't help them at all. It's not the way we should be doing assessment. Assessment done right is effective. Teaching to these tests now is totally ineffective.
Well, you're right. Actually, you can answer sitting down, doesn't matter. What is your opinion? Please don't applaud. What is your opinion of race to the top? And do you believe it is an effective approach to education reform?
Well, I don't know where Gary and I are on this, but I think in here we'll have some agreement. I think the problem with race to the top is not that, and that's the proposal that was put out by Arne Duncan and the Secretary of Education and the Obama administration that set standards. I like standards. The problem with race to the top, it is a one-size-fits-all, and it doesn't take into account the tremendous differences in learning that takes place between states. California's student population is quite different than Iowa's student population or South Carolina's student population. So the problem with race to the top is that it sets standards, fine, but it does not allow enough for individual states to use their own multiple measures, and it needs to be refined and changed. Almost all the states are now seeking waivers to meet their needs. So we need a system that takes into account the differences between learning styles of individual students, and that tracks the growth of students, not just the growth of overall schools or classes, and that really is used to benefit students. The system now is not that beneficial.
Thank you. Mr. DeLong.
I think Alan's right. We're mostly in agreement on this one. I think perhaps the only area of disagreement is philosophical. And I think that's the problem with the federal government being so heavily engaged in this and trying to set a standard that all the states must follow. And as Alan said, the states are very unique. California is different than Alabama, than Massachusetts. So really having a federal guideline really doesn't make a lot of sense. what we should be doing is we should be providing an appropriate level of oversight in the state, but really looking to the states to develop, in their school system, in their community, what's the best way to teach their kids, and then make sure that that's happening.
Thank you. I have another question. Exactly how would you lower the deficit? And try to be specific about what programs you might cut and or change, and also will you increase taxes at all as part of your plan to lower the deficit? In addition, what governmental regulations would you end to stimulate businesses and increase jobs?
Okay, multi-part question. All right, first of all, what would I do? As I mentioned previously, we need to reduce the cost of the federal government. And I'm not an anti-government person, I want to be clear about that. I think we should have as much government as we can afford. The problem is we have way more government than we can afford to do, so we need to cut costs. Now, one of the things I've learned in my public service life that's different than private sector is private sector, you can kind of just laser in on that piece of the organization, manufacturing, the sales organization, whatever it is, figure out what's broken and fix it. Government really doesn't work that way in my experience. So what you need to do is you need to say, well, I'm going to look at everything. I'm not going to focus on, like in a city, it's public works, it's police, it's parks. You come back and say, all right, give me 2 to 6% across the board cuts in your department. And we'll take a look at it, the legislative body, and we'll figure out what makes sense to the community with community input. And for those department heads that are running things pretty clean, very efficiently, they might take a smaller cut. Those that have excess bureaucracy and fat, it might be a little larger cut. But you take a look at all of it, and then your most important criteria is you make sure you focus on preserving the highest priorities in the community, the needs, and then you do some cutting where the wants are. And I would look at every federal resource agency. So it's not picking on the Department of Education, Department of, you have to look at everything. If you go in and just try and single out one thing, you're not going to be successful. That's what I think we need to do. In regards to growing the economy, regulations, in the last 30 seconds, I would do something similar to Governor Duke Major did when he was governor of California. What he did is he put together a committee that did 50,000 state regulations. Some they reaffirmed, they were great, they were helpful, they were productive. Some just had some unintended consequences, needed to be tweaked. Some were just plain awful, they had to be repealed. And what happened after he did that was several million jobs were created in the state of California. Now these jobs weren't created by government, but he created a hospitable business environment, a business climate, so the private sector could grow and create those jobs.
Stop. Thank you.
You want to read the question again?
Exactly how would you lower the deficit, and be specific if possible about what programs you would cut and or change, and also will you increase taxes at all as part of your plan to lower the deficit? In addition, what governmental regulations would you end to stimulate businesses and increase jobs?
Well, as far as the deficit, I think that in terms of the reality of what we can do and what we cannot do, I started to talk about this earlier. President Obama has put forth a plan of deficit reduction, and that plan has to do with reducing $4 trillion of deficit reduction in the next decade. Of that, there would be approximately $2.5 trillion in cuts. They're cuts across the board to every branch of government, including the military, and they reduce the budget, and they for every 2.5 of that 4 trillion, 2.5 trillion of that is cuts, specific cuts to all right across the board. $1 trillion of that is an increase. It's not really an increase. It's the ending of the Bush tax cuts to the wealthiest people. That's people earning over $250,000 a year, or a family earning over $500,000 a year. That is what would be that is where we would be back to the Clinton years when we had the greatest growth. As far as the Republican side, Mr. Ryan talks about a 5 next year and a reduction over this time of all cuts, but doesn't list where their cuts are, and they have no additional revenue. So he says they're going to be no taxes, some cuts, and some fixing of it. As the math doesn't add up. As far as regulations are concerned, I think that we too in California, and I agree with Gary, we should always be looking at regulations. But I'm telling you, do you think we don't want to get rid of all regulations?
Stop. Thank you. Now, are there current public services that you think should be outsourced to private institutions, Mr. Long?
At what level of government are we talking about? Remember, the local level is the folks that provide the direct services of public works and police and fire. The state kind of does over education, the highway patrol, and the Department of Motor Vehicles and so forth. I think that each level, I'm not really prepared to talk about outsourcing at the local level. At the federal level, I think there are fewer direct services that are provided. I can't imagine outsourcing. I do know that a proposal was put forth recently in terms of both Social Security and Medicare to take Social Security and privatize it and make it a 401, or to take Medicare and to put it into a voucher system, which are similar, all of those to outsourcing. I totally disagree with them. We are not going to put people at risk who have worked their whole life. So I disagree with outsourcing, if you're talking about at the federal level, to the major programs that are provided. I think that would be a horrible mistake. I served on the insurance committee. I know how insurance companies have exploited frequently, or there are people out there that exploit seniors sometimes. If we're now going to force people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s to start choosing between different plans and cap it and tell them what they can get, we are really at risk. I think that we have lost our commitment to people who have worked their entire lives. I am not about to give up that commitment.
Thank you. Mr. DeLong.
I'm absolutely open to the outsourcing. If the private sector can do it and maintain or improve the quality of service, and they can do it for a lower cost, I think that's in all of our best interests. Now, there are certainly, though, core missions of government, the local, state, and federal level, that you absolutely want a government employee to do. But there's many things that you don't. So why do you want to pay an inflated price if you don't have to, for the bureaucracy? Most immediate thing that comes to mind is any large capital projects. Why would you want to have your own construction crew to go build that building? I would absolutely look at the private sector to do that. But you need to do it in a regulated environment. You got to make sure that all the bids are competitive. You got to make sure that you're doing appropriate oversight at a government level. The taxpayer is getting the most bang for the buck that they possibly can. But I would tell you that most people, they don't care whether it's done by a public employee or a private employee. They just want a service provided, and they want top quality service. That's what they want. They don't designate, I want it provided by this person or that person. At a local level, I think your best example is trash pickup. And here in Long Beach, we do both, right? We have the public sector, public employees that pick up our trash, and then we have a private company that picks up our recycles. We want to pick it up every week, and we want them to do a good job. We want to do it cost effectively. I've never met a resident that tells me that he thinks one is much better than the other. They both do an outstanding job, both the city employees and the private sector. They both do a good job. So I think you just have an open mind. You got to look to see what's best for the community.
Thank you. And you're next, Mr. DeLong. In what ways would you propose that the federal government ensure the sustainability of Medicaid and Medicare?
That's a great question. If we don't make any changes, they're going to blow up. That's the first thing you have to understand. Some change needs to be made. Now, we might all have a different idea on what that change ought to be, and we probably do, but we have to get over the hurdle that some change needs to be made. It is not sustainable in its current path. There are more people coming in, there aren't enough people coming in to pay the system now, there are people using the benefits, and if you look at how that trend is going to change over the next 10, 15, 20 years, it's going to get dramatically worse. So let me tell you what the answer is. I've got it all figured out. Both sides need to work together. to figure it out. There is not a Republican solution to this problem. There is not a Democrat solution. They have to do it in lockstep, because regardless of what party you're in, if you try and go make changes and you don't have a partnership with the other side, you are going to get raked over the coals. You will not be able to make any progress. And that's one of the problems today in the gridlock in Washington. And it's both sides, folks. It is both sides. If one party tries to move forward and do something productive, it's going to introduce change, because a lot of people don't like change. The other side is just going to attack them. They're pushing grandma off the cliff. They're taking her health care away. And these awful, awful things are going to befall. So the most important thing is people have got to work together on both sides. And they got to compromise. You can't go on the list and say, by the way, you got to do these 5 things or else. I mean, you certainly have a list, but be prepared you're going to need to negotiate. You might get some of what you want. You got to get some of what they want. And you're going to have to do some compromise and some negotiation, and just keep your eye on the goal. And the goal is to make sure you have a sustainable system on a going forward basis. Now, I will tell you that I don't think we can make changes for people that are currently taking advantage of those services. And we probably can't make any changes if you're 55 or older. But the next generation, myself, that's coming along, we absolutely need a different system. We need to make sure it's sustainable over the long term.
Well, I think that we have a real clear differences in vision between Gary and myself. I think it's really clear we're talking about Medicaid and Medicare. We're talking about people who are on Medicare who are over 65, all citizens who are people who have paid into that system, and Medicaid are people who have the blind, the aged, the disabled, people who really need these kinds of services. One proposal on one side has said we need drastic change. We need to put the Medicaid into a block grant and send it back to the states and let the states decide whether they want to fund that. The Democratic proposal, what the president is proposing, says no. We need to make efficiencies. We need to make the system is not going broke. He has already demonstrated by passing the Congress and then signing the Affordable Care Act, or what we call Obamacare, that there are efficiencies of over $700 billion without any reduction in services. Those efficiencies must be maintained. The same thing about Medicare. Gary says, well, let's just cut it for people or change it. Real changes need to be done for people who are under 55. I think that is not where we should be doing. I think we should be finding efficiencies. And let's remember why there is not enough money also going into the system. It's not enough money going into the system because we have paid two wars on the credit card. We have allowed for economic deterioration of the economy based upon exploitation by banks. That's why we're in trouble. Let's fix that. Let's make it a sustainable system within by protecting the integrity of a system, not.
I purposely did not use their titles tonight because I just wanted it to be very equal. Mr. Okay. So you're not offended, I hope.
I didn't know what there is to be offended.
Well, I was
I think we
asked
told
by
each other,
somebody,
Gary and Alan.
you know, why didn't I say a councilman or why didn't I say doctor or whatever? I did it on. Now, the next question is
Alan. Whatever his name is, Diane.
The Supreme Court recently upheld the Patient Protection, and Affordable Care Act. However, health care reform continues to be a topic of great interest to Congress. What is the role of the federal government in ensuring affordability and quality health care?
Oh, I think it has a great role in making sure that we have affordability and also quality of health care, and I think there's more to be done. But I'm a great proponent of the fact that what we have done now is to at least say that we're going to have health care for all in this country. And we're going to, I would have probably gone far beyond what we've done now. But I think that at least now, as a first step,